In the episode right before this one, we talked about how video can make or break a podcast. And while maybe you're not ready to dip a toe into video podcasting just yet, or maybe you already have, there are some easy things that we can all be doing with video to help create a deeper connection with your listeners that keeps them engaged and coming back for more. And I've got the founder of GoRogue Studio, Bryan Fittin, back in the studio with me to talk about one of the most underutilized ways to use video to make it easy to create the kind of content that's going to get listeners interested in you and in your podcast. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Bryan, welcome back.
So excited to be here. This is amazing. This is so much fun.
I know. I love it too. Well, look, and in the episode right before this one, we were unpacking how video can make or break your podcast and some of the considerations and the things that you need to be thinking about if you are just getting started in video, if you're thinking about getting started in video, or if you're like, I never want to touch video with a 10-foot pole and I'm going to sit here and confirm that that's okay and it's fine. And, we all choose our path forward. But if you do want to get started in video, we're going to talk about one of the most underutilized, yet one of the easiest ways to get started with video, and that is behind the scenes content. So, Bryan, before we get into the how of creating really effective behind the scenes content or BTS content, I'm curious to know, why is it, do you think, that sharing just a glimpse of your process of that behind the scenes can really help to humanize a podcast and get people interested in your show?
Yeah. It comes back to anytime we talked about conferences before, right? Every time I come back home from a conference, I'm like, oh, I took all these photos and I took all these videos. And then you go back and it was like 10. I'm like, I was there for like 4 days. I thought I was documenting everything. It goes back to that same thing where you think if you can just start by documenting. Gary Vee said that a long time ago. He's like, don't create content, document everything. And so I have tried to take that on, especially in our day-to-day lives and different things. Like you shared something recently on your stories about working out. And then you're like, now we're about to record. And it's just one of those things that has nothing, quote unquote, to do with your podcast, but it is a connection point. And so for us, it has been very much and having a studio, and I love seeing behind the scenes stuff in other people's studios. And I just kind of assume that people want to see that. We're in a different world though. My wife, she's like, not everybody cares about that stuff, man. And I was like, I know, but I do. My friends do. Right. And so again, knowing your audience, right? It's one of those of just documenting everything. When you're going into, hey, we're about to record, we're about to do this. This is what I'm working on. I love seeing that from content creators, seeing behind the scenes of their setups, which we need to grab a photo before we jump off here too. So I can share our setup here, but just being able to showcase that again, from a video perspective is such a connection point for somebody. And so talking about like going live and live streaming back in the day when that was a really big thing and everybody was starting to do it. Part of the advice that I would always give people is like, start off in your Instagram stories and just record yourself looking at the camera and see what that feels like first before you're like, I got to do this whole live stream setup and I got to get all this equipment and get everything figured out. No, just get comfortable talking to a camera. And from there, and the easiest way to do that, like you said, is through stories or through TikTok or Reels or whatever that is, just being able to start something. And that's such a low barrier of entry to get you familiar with that. And then there's a whole storytelling strategy that you can do, especially in your stories or Reels or even shorts, that I think is beneficial. But just get comfortable with the camera and on social media aspect.
Okay, so this next question I'm asking for a friend. So documenting. All right. Look, Gary Vee did make this very popular back in the day, and we've heard, document. I don't know what it is, Bryan, but for some reason I have struggled with that because there's this little voice in my head that goes, yeah, people don't care about that. I'm maybe more in the camp of your wife, right? Where it's like, does people really want to see what like my messy desk looks like? And, here I am in my office again, recording episode 300 and something of the podcast. I've already shared that before, right? And it's just that little voice of doubt that gets in my head and sometimes prevents me from sharing stuff that I know maybe could be helpful for people or that would give people a peek into my process. For those that are maybe sitting here listening right now, like nodding their head, like, yep, that's me. I get it. And this is why I don't share things to my Instagram stories, or maybe not as consistently every day as I would like to. What advice would you give them? What do you say makes a good, interesting, engaging piece of behind the scenes content that maybe doesn't feel repetitive or that doesn't feel overly self-promotional, but that really feels authentic and that really feels genuine?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Donald Miller and StoryBrand and that StoryBrand framework. So it's not anything new that he created. He just pulled it more into the business world, which is the hero's journey. There's a hero that has a problem. They meet a guide, and then the guide shows them the process, and then they walk them through that to show them success or failure. There's a lot of other points in between that, but it's, Star Wars. It's Yoda and Luke. Like, he meets him. Yoda's the guide and helps him along the way. Like, that's how a lot of times film is made, and screenwriting and all that is made, is through that storytelling lens. I would say take that same approach with documenting. Yes, document to document, but share things that are valuable. The other day I was walking up to the studio, unlocked the door, and I was like, I'm just going to record walking in and turning on the lights. I did that, shared it to LinkedIn, and the amount of comments and likes and people, and I just said, hey, I'm just grateful to be able to wake up and do what I do. Like, this is insane. I worked in the corporate world for 15 years. I love what I do now, and not everybody gets that chance. And so it's one of those that I just documented a basic, this is me walking into the building. This is where our coffee pot is. Like, this is walking around to see like our first studio set up. And this is, just very basic stuff, but it showed people our studio space. It showed just all the things I'm proud of that we've created. And so I think if you have that mindset of, one, specifically Instagram stories, that is for the people who follow you. That is your audience. Those are the people that said, yes, I want to come along with you on this journey. Show up for them in that space and use that storytelling framework. Hey, are you struggling with this? Let me be your guide. I'm not the hero in this story. Let me be your guide to show you what this looks like, a process. And so if it is, hey, even for you, Court, or your friend, whoever your friend is, right, that's asking this question.
We'll call her Michelle. Not that like that's my middle name or anything, but Michelle.
I didn't know that. That's good to know that. So Michelle, very much that storytelling piece where it is a, hey, are you struggling getting quality guests or whatever, right? You've had a guy on the name Bryan that he's just terrible. And it's one of those moments, right? Being able to say, hey, this is what I do to document that. And so we use this form. And so I'm walking into my office, and this is when I meet with my assistant, and this is how we go through this process. So it could just be very much photo. It could be very much video as well. And being able to see, oh, she's a normal person. I hear the podcast and you do a phenomenal job with that. But also, you guys got hit with some snow recently, and even understanding, I think you shared something about your kid as well, just the thought process of walking through that, what that looks like as well. And it just made it way more of a connection in a day in the life of, again, and I was on that journey with you, and I felt like I was part of that story. And I think if you keep that in mind when sharing behind the scenes for your podcast, for your content, like keep that end user in mind of not just this has to look perfect, but actually showing what real looks like is such a connection point. And people are like, oh, your house is a little messy, or like, oh, your desk is a little messy. And like, that's okay, because showing the perfect life on social media is just exhausting as a user myself, because I don't want anybody to be like, Bryan's life is perfect and my life is not. I don't ever want that to show up. So I want to be able to show real, this is messy. We're getting started late. We didn't get as prepared as we needed to. Whatever it is, right? That just makes that connection point. And then again, makes people want to hear you on your show, because then it's like, oh, now I know that person even more.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a good and such a needed reminder, truthfully. And I think this brings up an important point too about how we as podcast hosts should be utilizing social media. I find that a lot of podcast hosts have the misconception that I'm going to post about my podcast to my social platforms and that's going to drive traffic back to my show. And then a few weeks in, they're dismayed to find that their downloads are still at the same 12 downloads an episode. And this is the reality for a lot of people. I remember in the early days of my podcast, it was amazing when an episode would break 100 downloads, and you're like, whoa, what did I do there? That was different. That was awesome, And I can remember what that felt like. And it can be really discouraging sometimes, when you have these high expectations for the content that you're going to put out there. And yet what you just shared, Bryan, was so good, not just because of, the practicality of your approach and what you're sharing with us here, but also the reminder that social media is not meant as a tool or a driver of podcast growth. It's meant as a connector. And so when you can make those connections, you will have people more engaged with your podcast. It might be the people who already listen. It might not necessarily bring you new traffic, new audience, because to grow a podcast, you have to get in front of cold listeners. Your social media followers are warm. They already know you. They already trust you. and they'll feel more connected to you when you share that. I think that's a really important point. But that might be different than, say, Spotify, where you might want to share more specific content related to your podcast to reach cold traffic. And I would imagine there's a difference there between sharing content for your warm audience versus sharing for your cold audience. Or is there a difference? Should it be the same? Or should we have a mindset or thinking about that a little bit differently when it goes to, okay, here's content that I'm creating to attract to me and potentially drive traffic to the podcast, and also considering where I'm posting that, versus content that I'm sharing to create deeper connections with the people who already follow me.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the time that shareable content, word of mouth, is the best tool that you can have to gain new listeners or new subscribers or whatever that is, because somebody is giving a recommendation for you, right? And so in that same space, your content, if you're creating that for your people who are already big fans of yours, as 1,000 raving fans, they're going to share that. And you want to make content that is easily shareable for them, easily barrier of entry. Like, hey, this is right now, go right now and share this. Hey, if this is helpful for you, or you have a friend that could benefit from this, share this content right now. I do agree that from a cold and warm side of things, specifically Instagram is very much designed that the new people are going to show up on your grid. And so tailoring your content that is on your grid for new people, get to know you. It's easy to understand who you are, who you're serving, and what value you're going to bring. And then in the stories, it is very much that is people who love you and who follow you already. So creating content for them in that space. From a podcast standpoint, I think Jeremy had mentioned it in a previous episode too. His newsletter, I'm an avid consumer of his newsletter. He phenomenal value that comes out of his newsletter. But that's just one point. You know, he has that. He has his podcast. He has his YouTube channel. He has other shows. Where did you hear about me? He gave some great advice on that previous episode. And so from that standpoint of understanding, it's just part of this ecosystem that I'm creating to help serve my audience. I would say from a Spotify specifically, if you're going to be creating content that is for Spotify, make sure that it is the message that is going to help them in their show. I would not create a clip and go share, and this can across all platforms, Spotify clips. Don't share a long intro of somebody. Don't be like, well, tell me about yourself. Well, I grew up here and we went there and this is where I went to college and blah, blah, blah. I mean, good grief. I'm bored and I'm answering that question, you know? And so think about like, what is the best content I can put out there to attract that cold audience of, are you this person? Are you like, we do creator events here in our studio and local meetups. And I'm like, are you somebody who is just feels judged when they put their art out into the world? Do you feel lonely? Do you feel like everybody else is doing it right and you're not? If you are feeling that way, we have this amazing guest who said this, or I go into that. Hey, John, what's the biggest thing you've overcome? Well, I failed at 3 different creative businesses. Oh my goodness. Like that immediately can hook somebody into that. So if you're going to be sharing those clips specifically to a cold audience, be thinking of, man, I need to bring them the most value, the absolute most value out of this content to help them, because that then will pull them into, oh, whoa, that was a hard hitting answer. That was no fluff, right? I failed at this. This is what I did wrong. And I've learned from that. Well, I want to hear about what happened. You know, how did they learn from that? And then I want to listen to the rest of that episode. And so I think in that space, especially if you're running ads or anything like that on your content, make sure that you are hitting them with the most value out of the gate. And one, if it's not for them, then it saves them time, and you don't look bad in the algorithm of somebody just swiping off and moving on. You want the people that it is going to be helpful for. And so, yeah, creating that very specific content, thinking about with the end in mind, rather than just throwing a bunch of stuff out there and hoping it all works.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say is one of the best ways to add value is by getting really specific on what you're helping someone solve. This goes back to the guide, right? Where it's like, okay, I know you so well because maybe I was you, or maybe I've worked with a lot of people like you. But when you can communicate someone's problem to them in a way that's so hyper specific, not only is that valuable, but it makes them lean in. I'll never forget once I was teaching a workshop and I said, so if you were someone who has a podcast and you're stuck in less than 200 download per episode jail, then blah, 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 blah. And this one person afterwards, she was in my DMs and she's like, I wanted to be offended when you said that. And yet I wasn't, because it was so accurate. And immediately I was like, I need your help. And she's a client of ours and she's rocking and rolling. She's doing amazing, amazing work with her podcast. And so it's just that specificity. And I think a lot of times we have a fear of getting that specific because we don't want to alienate. But to your point, no, that's exactly what we want to do because we want to create that community. And you mentioned this in the episode before of those 1,000 raving fans who really align with the work that you're doing. Because if you can build 1,000, you can build 10,000. You can build 10,000, you can build 100,000. So Bryan, for someone who maybe doesn't have a video editing team, they don't have a production studio that they can go to record this kind of content, what is the simplest and the most effective way for someone to do this at home? Can we talk tech for a minute? Because I mean, I have an iPhone and there's mixed opinions about, is this good to film videos on? Is this bad to film videos on? What should you do for your lighting? What should you do for, you need a tripod over here. Here's how to set it up, so you don't see that messy desk in the room, or maybe you do. Can you talk to us about some recommendations for what's the best way to capture and document these behind the scenes in our home when we don't have someone following us around full time with a camera?
Yeah, absolutely. From a video podcasting standpoint, I mean, there are a lot of great tools out there, Zencaster, Riverside. Just getting started, Zoom. As much as I hate to say that, but I just from a producer standpoint,
it has its place. It has its place.
It has
100%.
absolutely. And so from that standpoint, I mean, yeah, that is an easy way, obviously, to get started with just recording yourself. I mean, here's the deal. I'm on a 8-year-old webcam right now. And so adjusting like the settings to where I know that separating myself from the background, right? There's little things that you can do. And then obviously with lighting, a little bit of placement, and then making sure your audio sounds good. Like being able to have those things set up appropriately and help with production value. It doesn't take a whole lot, but from an iPhone standpoint, I mean, good grief. Yes, the iPhone and even a lot of other models out there have phenomenal cameras. So you talk about like documenting in general. I mean, I think TikTok has done a great job of saying, hey, you don't need production value to create content that is valuable for people or that what people want to consume. And so that barrier of entry is very low right now to be able to do that. And so there are lots of other tutorials out there of how to shoot well on an iPhone. There's different settings and stuff like that you can use for your specific phone. But overall, I mean, it is very easy to get started in that. And again, that storytelling piece I can't say that enough. Like you don't have to have the best equipment to start in the storytelling piece and using your phone. I mean, there's lots of great editing software out there that is free. And so, yeah, don't make it too hard. Don't think about it too much. But again, story is the biggest piece to be able to start. So a friend of mine is recently traveling and I noticed he's in Alaska. So he was filming him walking out to this tiny plane that they were taking on a snowstorm. And he was flying to California for this. I'm like, and I told him, I was like, you live a different life than I live right now. So it is. And so I feel like I'm not watching National Geographic every time I watch his stories, but he's a filmmaker. He does a great job of telling his story through that. And so he's not just like, hey, I'm in San Diego now. It's like, well, how'd you get to San Diego? And there's, again, that storytelling piece. But again, filming it from my equipment wise, you can tell a great story with the tools that you already have. And that brings people into it. And so again, don't overthink it. Don't invest a ton of money into something. I've seen so many people do that. And you probably have with podcasting. They're like, I spent $5,000 on all this podcast stuff. I'm like, you have no strategy. You have no idea what you're doing, which I hate. I'm like, great, go do it. If I can help you, I want to. But it just quickly burns people out because they get too much in their head about the equipment. So start with what you have and just, again, go out and serve those people. They want to know about you. They want to see behind the scenes. They want you to create that content or they wouldn't be following you. They wouldn't be engaging with you.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I'm so glad you bring this up. And again, another needed reminder that the tech doesn't matter as much as we sometimes make it out to matter. And it's really more about mastering your craft as a podcast host, as a content creator, as the leader of your brand who's here to help people. If you want to help people, you have to be able to show them how you can help them. And it's something I continue to learn every day. Bryan, this has been such an insightful conversation. 2 rapid fire questions. Okay. One is a little bit selfish. So you mentioned audio quality, and we know that's super important for the podcast. What about when you are using your iPhone to film? Is there like a mic or a wireless mic that you recommend most often to people to say, this is the one that you need, it's affordable, go get this, and it's going to elevate the audio quality of your videos? Because I think this is a step people tend to overlook.
Yeah. Well, one, and you'll see them pretty much all over TikTok or anybody that's creating content. So Rode has a great product, their Wireless Go series, as well as DJI. Like they have a phenomenal one that has some clipping capabilities where it's like you don't have to worry about, am I yelling too loud or am I talking too loud and the audio comes out terrible. So those are just really quick easy things that you can use. We have some of those as backups, even for us on video production stuff, just because they're nice to have as a backup. So yes, that will connect to your phone. You'll be able to use them easily. If you have a little bit of a budget, definitely invest in the audio side.
Awesome. Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes. And then last question for you is, if someone's like, okay, I want to commit to this. I want to do a better job. I know I need to do a better job of showing my story, sharing my behind the scenes, so that other people can see themselves in this process and what it would be like to work with me and to feel that level of connection. I know I need to be sharing more with my community, but I'm still stuck on, what do I share? What's their best first step as they walk away from this episode today?
Well, it's easy if you are your ideal audience, right? So you know the problems that you have. So I would say create content that you would like to see, because there's no easier way to talk directly to yourself in that sense. And if it's not, then obviously identifying a problem that that they have. And so, the marketing world, and even the podcasting world, we talk about having that ideal client persona, that person on the other side, give them a name, they're an avatar. And I'm speaking to John right now, and you see John going through X, Y, and Z. And so I think if you can view it through that lens, rather than like, hey, I've got all these people that might watch it, then it does get overwhelming. So I would say the quickest, easiest way to say is, what content do you want to see? And just go out and create that.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for being here today. You shared so many key takeaways. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And again, I've gained so much value from you as well. So you keep doing it, and tell your friend Michelle that, yes, she should start doing some video at some point.
I'll let her know. I'll write her a letter. I'm kidding. I had a laugh when we ended that episode, because I told Bryan, I was like, write her a letter? Like, what the heck? Are we in 1908 or something? Like, the things that come out of my mouth sometimes. And then, of course, the little gremlin on my shoulder is like, you should edit that out. That's people don't want to hear that on your podcast. But actually, no, those are the things that make a podcast endearing. Those are the things that connect listeners to you. So whether it's some random off the wall comment that I make, or my little Cajun accent coming out, Sha, that's just one of the things that makes this show unique. And it's these little personality quirks, or the way that you say things, that makes your show unique. And it's what makes listeners feel deeply connected to you. So much so that coming up in the next episode, I did something I swore I would never do, just so that I could prove it to you. All in the name of helping you succeed. So whether you're just listening for the first time, or you hang out with me regularly here on the show, you are going to be floored when you hear the difference this can make and why this matters for your podcast. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.